Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Today we have a special edition of the show where we recapture the finest moments in commentary, bringing you the best of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. Let's start with our first topic of the day. Poland's president has just signed the country's controversial Holocaust bill officially into law. Now, that means people can be fined or even face jail time for using the words Polish death camp to describe Nazi concentration camps in Poland, including Auschwitz. This, unfortunately, is not the first country to pass legislation like this. Lithuania, Latvia, and the Ukraine all have laws that also criminalize even discussing the role those countries played in helping the Nazis. Now, my question for both of you is what is the impact of this latest Polish law, especially on Europe as a whole? And Professor, why don't you begin?
Well, first of all, let's start with history. The Lithuanians, the Latvians, the Ukrainians, and some Poles were very complicit in the Holocaust. In the Ukraine, many of the Jews were killed by Ukrainian nationalists. In Lithuania, they didn't even wait for the Nazis to come before they started murdering Jews. The same is true in Latvia. Poland is a little bit of a different story because the Polish government didn't collaborate with the Nazis. They fought back for the most part. But Polish individuals have a very, very mixed record. They burned Jews in barns. They murdered Jews when they came back in Kielce in 1946. Some individual Polish people collaborated, turned in Jews. Many Polish leaders of the Catholic Church preached anti-Semitic sermons for years and years and years, including the primates of the church. So it's a mixed picture. And the law should never prohibit debate and discussion about these issues. Look, it is true that the camps were not Polish death camps. They were Nazi German death camps, and they were mostly manned by Ukrainians, Latvians, Lithuanians, not by Poles. And it's also true that 1.6 million approximately Polish non-Jews were killed. So Poland is a complex issue, and historians and moralists have to be able to sort it out for themselves. But no country should allow Holocaust denial to become part of the law. And when you say that the Ukrainians, the Latvians, the Lithuanians, and some Poles did not participate in the Shoah, that is a form of Holocaust denial, and no law should ever justify it.
Now, Enrique, I'd like to get your take on this, but I also would like to have you answer why now? Why is this law, being implemented right now?
Well, I agree with Professor Dershowitz, but I think I would add there is a kind of tendency to reinforce the revisionism about the Shoah, the Holocaust. I think there are new waves in Europe, and they are stronger and stronger in many countries in Europe, and Poland is one example, that try to rewrite history. And it's true, there were some Polish people who saved Jews in the Holocaust, during the Holocaust. But I remember my grandfather saying that one of the things that he remembers and that was really traumatic for him was the fact that some neighbors of them that were quite friends for many, many years collaborated with the Nazis persecuting Jews. So I believe this is part of their history, and I believe that we here in Israel, as the Jewish state, have the obligation to fight not to allow to rewrite history only 75 years after the Holocaust. It's nothing. It's just a very short phase, and we are already seeing this kind of objectives in this government. And another thing I think, sometimes I ask myself, Natasha, why the camps were located in Poland, and I ask myself the big camps, the more, I would say, where more Jews were killed, assassinated by the Nazis, and maybe there is a connection. Maybe there was a reason to do it in Poland.
Yeah,
Important point, although 70 years is a short period of time, it's very significant because it means that basically all the survivors are now close to the end of their lives, and there will be fewer and fewer eyewitnesses, so it's easier to rewrite history. Let's also remember there were Polish heroes. Jan Karski was a phenomenal hero, a Polish Catholic lawyer who risked his life by going into the death camps and reporting on them. Families that harbored Jews and were murdered. priests and nuns who took Jews in and allowed them to live in the covenant. So I tell the story in my op-ed in yesterday's Wall Street Journal, in which I write against the law, but try to present the truth about Poland in all of its complexity. But I agree with you. I think we also have to ask the question, why did the Nazis pick Poland? And I think at least one reason was their history, their long history of church-inspired anti-Semitism.
You know, Natasha, I told Pope Francis, I'm very close to him in the last 4 years, and I told him that when I was in Auschwitz, one of the things that really were quite a surprise for me was to see churches so close to the camp. And he said to me that he's very sorry about that, and he said that he has the intention to open the archives about the behavior, to show to the world the behavior of the church during the Second World War and towards the Jews. We'll see what happened, if he will be able to do it.
I'd like to introduce our guest for today. Kobi Sudri is one of Israel's top criminal lawyers and appears almost daily on Israeli media. And we'd like to start our conversation by turning to the hottest issue in the United States, the unfolding story of the so-called Russian collusion in the United States presidential election, and of course, its potential to throw the United States into a constitutional crisis. Kobi, will it?
Well, that's a great question, but for sure for the last year, actually since President Trump was elected, USA is in a real turmoil. Yeah. A situation which is abnormal, of course, that the last time we remember something which was similar is the Nixon time.
Now, Professor Dershowitz, what is your response to that?
Well, I think the situation in the United States is abnormal, but the United States is just imitating Israel. Israel is in a state of crisis virtually every single day. Threats to undo the government, threats to indict and criminalize political differences. It started with Rabin. It continued up through Sharon, through Olmert. And now there's these, I believe, unjustified cases against the current prime minister of Israel. So the United States, welcome to Israel's world, where every day there's a crisis about whether or not the criminal law will be used to undo democratic results in an election. So it is unusual in the United States, but it's not unusual when compared to what's going on in Israel, where crisis is the normal state of affairs for the nation state of the Jewish people.
But do you find the FBI current investigation unjustified? Do you really think that there is a plot against the president?
No, I don't. I don't think it's a plot. I think it's unjustified. I don't think that it is possible under our Constitution for the president to commit an obstruction of justice if all he does is exercise his constitutional authority. One of the things the president's allowed to do is fire any member of the executive branch. He's also allowed to terminate any investigation. Remember, the system is different in Israel and the United States. Israel, you divide the function into Minister of Justice, the political advisor to the Prime Minister, the cabinet, the government, and the Attorney General, an independent law enforcement official. In the United States, we merge those roles. And so the President of the United States, under the unitary executive, has the authority to start or stop any investigation of any individual. And so it would be wrong for the special counsel, who should never have been appointed in the first place, to be investigating obstruction of justice unless the president committed an independent crime like bribery or tampering with witnesses or something like that. And as far as collusion is concerned, I've studied the statute books from beginning to end. The word collusion appears, as far as I can tell, only once in the statute books, and it has nothing to do with politics. It has to do when businesses collude together in violation of the antitrust law. So even if, hypothetically, the Trump administration colluded with Russia, it would not be a crime. So I do not think the current investigation is warranted or justified. And the end result will probably be some low-hanging fruit. They will probably indict some more people like Manafort and others and Flynn. But they, if they abide by the Constitution, they won't get close to the law.
All right, well, I'd like to shift the focus from the United States to Israel and how the criminal justice system is impacting politics over here. Who would like to begin on this topic?
Well, of course we find a similarity because we see a situation in which a prime minister or a president is under an investigation, and his first claim, his defense claim is, listen, they're trying to take me down, not through a political way, not by polls, but through police or FBI. And it makes the situation very, very similar. Now, I wonder if Professor Dershowitz thinks that this is the same tactics of the opponents of the president and of the prime minister.
I have no doubt about that. If you take the media, Yediot Ahronot has been trying to bring down the prime minister. Haaretz, other media are trying to bring down the prime minister. They can't beat him in the polls, and so they're trying to create cases against him. Now, of course, it is a crime to engage in bribery, but nobody has ever before suggested that taking gifts from friends, cigars and champagne, should be enough to bring down a prime minister, or having a conversation with the editor of Yediot Ahronot in which discussion is had of whether or not you can have better coverage of the family, or the allegations about the submarines. Those all seem to me like efforts to stretch existing law and existing practice to get a prime minister who is controversial, particularly controversial among the left and among the media and among the chattering classes in Tel Aviv, and to use the criminal law to bring him down. I think it's a serious, serious mistake. I think it endangers Israeli democracy, and I think it should stop. I think the investigation should come to an end. It's lasted so long. I think there should be a recommendation against indicting or prosecuting the prime minister. Let the public judge. If the public think he took too many cigars and too many bottles of champagne, let them vote against him. But the use of the criminal law in an expansive way, it's always a matter of degree. Obviously, if you take $1 million and you give something in exchange, that's bribery. But if you take cigars from friends, we had a recent case like that in the United States. Bob Menendez was charged with giving favors to friends and taking airplane trips with friends, and the Justice Department just decided to drop that case. And I think that's what should happen in Israel as well.
And you hold the same opinion no matter how expensive the presents were? Because they say it's not only cigars, it's cigars that were worth hundreds of thousands of shekels.
Well, then Israel should pass a law saying, here is the limit on gifts. It's 50,000 shekels or 20,000 shekels. Let there be a clear law, but let it not be a matter of degree. When you have a popular prime minister who is liked by the left, you say, well, 50,000 shekels isn't too much in cigars, but if you have somebody who's controversial, well, maybe that's enough. Pass a statute, and the prime minister and everybody else will abide by the statute. Put numbers in the statute. Say exactly how much a prime minister can take from a friend, and beyond that, it becomes a crime. But don't leave it to the discretion of law enforcement to determine when enough is too much. That gives them too much authority and too much power and too much ability to criminalize political differences.
The thing is that under Israeli law, you have such a statute, which is much more general, and it's called fraud and breach of trust.
Mm-hmm. But it's a matter of degree. If he took 1,000 shekels worth of cigars, nobody would suggest that that would be a breach of trust. But if he takes somewhat more, but how much more, we don't know. And leaving those matters of degree to discretion and judgment risks great injustices under our legal system. The criminal law has to be crystal clear. Thomas Jefferson once put it, it has to be so clear that you can understand it if you read it while running. That was his expression. And when you read the statute that you've referred to, it's so vague, it's so general, it's so open-ended, it's so subject to discretion and abuse that Israel ought to change the law and have very specific criteria for when the law is violated in terms of numbers and in terms of what the quid pro quo has to be and the relationship between the gifts and the quid pro quo. All of that has to be made a lot clearer than it is today.
Now, joining us now in the studio is Dr. Dan Shiftan, the director of the National Security Studies Center at the University of Haifa. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm going to let you kick off your discussion with the professor.
I want to discuss a new challenge that Israel is facing, and I don't think we have any precedent Israel is set in the middle of a region that is not only in deep crisis, not only with enormous failure, but also hopeless. And what is new in the last few years is the understanding of people in the region that it is a hopeless region, namely that it's not a crisis, not something that in a few years will be over, not something that in the next generation or more than a generation can be settled. They realize that this is something that will affect them for a very long period of time. And therefore, millions of people from the region either leave it or want to leave it and can't leave it, not for a while, a shelter for the night, but for a long period of time because they don't believe that their children and their children's children have much hope in this region. And this has in the near future, it has minor advantages to Israel, but it has a major disadvantage. The advantages are that we are surrounded by weak countries, and at the moment they don't present an existential threat to Israel. But if you look at the broader picture, it means that for a very long time to come, this generation, probably the next generation, hoping for peace in the region is not realistic. Not only because you have very anti-Israel positions among the Palestinians and others and radical elements, but also because in the midst of this turmoil, where you have people killing each other on a scale that we have not seen in other places, where we have states that are not sustainable, leaving Israel alone, a situation where Israel can be surrounded by relatively stable countries, is not an option. And it is also not an option that the radicals in this region will treat the Israelis, if they could, better than they treat their own brothers. So the question is, and I think Israeli public opinion is beginning to adjust to it, understanding that conflict is not a transit period. It is something that will be with us for a very, very long time to come. I don't remember we've ever had a democratic society, an open society, facing this kind of hostility on such a scale for such a long time. I don't have any doubt that Israel can deal with it, but I'm saying this is something that we have to prepare ourselves for, and to a large extent, Israeli public opinion is already beginning to prepare for it.
Well, it reminds me of the old joke that in Israel, a pessimist is somebody who says, "Oi, things are so bad they can't possibly get any worse," and an optimist says, "Yes, they can." You're suggesting that things really are bad and can get worse. Well, I have a different view of the matter. I do think you're right that we're never going to see stable democracies surrounding Israel, certainly not in our lifetime. But I think that this is the appropriate time, because of Israel's relative strength and the relative weakness of other countries, for Israel to offer a generous peace to the Palestinians, to either get a rejection for a generous peace of the kind that happened in 2000, 2001, and 2008, and the response that Israel got to the withdrawal from the Gaza. It's time for Israel to do that again, with the possibility that a weak Palestinian state with an old Palestinian leader may actually want to sit down and try to come up with some kind of a two-state solution. If that were to happen, if there were to be a peace treaty between Israel and the Palestinians, much like that between Israel and Egypt and Jordan, even though it's shalom, shalom, and shalom, peace, peace, but no real peace, I think Israel's relationships with the Sunni Arab states could improve tremendously. The benefit to the Sunni states in the Gulf would be tremendous, and Israel could at least add to the stability of the region and take advantage of the current instability. I think Israel's, right now, the situation with the Palestinians is not helping Israel, and I do think that some solution, not going to be perfect, but some solution with the Palestinians, some symbolic right of return of 40 or 50,000 people, a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, land swaps for the existing settlements remaining in Israel, with an equal amount of land in the Afula Triangle being given over to a Palestinian state. The time is right for that offer to be put on the table, and for the Palestinians to either accept it or reject it, or to sit down and negotiate about it. I do think that take advantage of instability to help create just a little bit more stability in the region would be important.
Well, we've been busy trying to solve the problems here on Earth. There was a gathering of some of the top scientists, researchers, and astronauts on the planet here in Israel for Space Week. And as you can assume, they were looking beyond, literally. Now here's a message from some of the top guns.
Shalom, Alan. We're here in Tel Aviv for the Israeli Space Week, commemorating Ilan Ramon and the crew of the Space Shuttle Columbia. There's amazing energy here, and it's great to see such positivity about the future in space.
And a shout out to our friend Adam Dershowitz, flight controller, engineer, pilot, all around good guy, definitely certified smart guy. Hello from us.
Hi, Alan. My name is Charlie Bolden. I'm the immediate past administrator of NASA. I'm here with your friend Danny Grossman, and we're attending the Ilan Ramon Space Conference, where we're watching kids be inspired, having a great time with kids from all over Israel, Arab, Muslim, Jewish, you name it. And look forward to maybe meeting you sometime, sitting down and talking about a little philosophy. So take care of yourself. Shalom.
Well, thank you so much. Especially thank you for the shout out to my nephew, Adam. As you know, Adam was supposed to be an astronaut, and he was in the program. And then they discovered he had been born with one kidney. Nobody ever knew that. And he fought hard, arguing that one kidney is as good as two when you're in space. But they wouldn't allow him to join the astronaut program itself. So he became a ground controller and lived in Houston for many years, met Ilan Ramon and many of the other astronauts. When he got married, one of the astronauts took his wedding ring and his wife's wedding ring up to space. So he wears a wedding ring that's been in space. He's named his two children. One of his sons his son is called Mars, and his daughter is called Zara Columbia. And so he still has close associations with space, and we're very, very proud of what he does on Earth to help space programs. So thank you, and thank you for coming to Israel and working so closely together with Israeli space program and other space programs in order to help achieve peace. Thank you. Kol hakavod.
That wraps up this edition of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.